In 2002, deep within the scorching Cerrejón coal mine in Colombia, a team of paleontologists excavating the remains of a rainforest suddenly buried under mud and volcanic ash uncovered hundreds of different vertebrae and rib bones. Many of these bones were well preserved, but what was even more interesting was that they were unusually large. Yet, the research team that found them didn't seem too surprised and didn't dwell on them much. The formation they were in was famous for housing numerous giant reptiles, primarily from the Paleocene, like enormous turtles and massive crocodiles. For this reason, the team initially thought they had found a new species of crocodile because the newly discovered bones resembled the crocodile bones they had previously found in that formation. Anyway, everyone quickly accepted the idea that these bones belonged to a crocodile. That is, until these bones were re-examined 7 years later. This re-examination led to an unexpected discovery. They were not from a giant crocodile, but from a gigantic snake. And by gigantic, I mean a truly enormous snake. Thus, the most fitting name was given to this new snake, Titanoboa. After all, it was the largest snake discovered to date, a true titan. Yes, I know you've heard this name a lot. Frankly, it deserves this fame because adults could reach lengths of up to 14.3 meters or 47 feet. To put that in perspective, that's only slightly longer than an adult T-Rex. Thus, the unbelievably large Titanoboa easily dethroned the previous record holder, Gigantophis garstini. But things didn't go smoothly, and a new snake species was discovered that would dethrone Titanoboa. That snake was Vasuki indicus. Now, let's rewind a bit. The holotype specimen of Vasuki was first discovered in 2005 inches, the sedimentary layers of India's Naredi Formation, just 3 years after Titanoboa's discovery. During this discovery, the research team found 27 large vertebrae. Interestingly, most of these vertebrae were preserved in their actual life positions. This is truly an incredible thing because snake skeletons are fragile, and records of snake fossils are much rarer compared to dinosaurs. It's quite ironic, but Vasuki's situation largely mirrored Titanoboa's. That is, the paleontologists who found these bones, like with Titanoboa, initially thought they had found a new crocodile species, and the matter was closed there. However, unlike Titanoboa, this specimen unfortunately had to wait 19 years for a second chance. With advancing technology, when the fossils were re-examined in 2024, Vasuki indicus was finally given a second look. According to the examination, due to specific characteristics in the vertebrae, it was first thought these fossils belonged to a Madtsoiidae species. But the discovered vertebrae were so large that the research team suspected it might be a new species. Based on regression equations derived from post-zygapophyseal width, the team calculated that this new snake was at least 10.9 to 12.2 meters, or 36 to 40 feet long. These values made Vasuki much longer than any reptile alive today, and even more interestingly, placed it among the 5 largest snakes of all time. However, these values were just an estimate for now. As examinations continued, the research team realized the initial estimates were insufficient. Thus, the estimates based on regression equations grew even larger. A second equation resulted in a body length range of 14.5 to 15.2 meters, or 48 to 50 feet. With this length, Vasuki was not only the new king of snakes, but also the longest reptile to have ever lived on land. Naturally, the discovery of a snake possibly larger than Titanoboa created quite a stir. However, a major question still remains unanswered. We are not sure if Vasuki was heavier or lighter than Titanoboa. Currently, the maximum weight given for Vasuki indicus is about 1.1 tons, while for Titanoboa, this figure can reach up to 1.25 tons in maximum estimates. It's not a huge difference, but for now, it seems Titanoboa is heavier than Vasuki. On the other hand, Vasuki's vertebrae dimensions are smaller than Titanoboa's, but the largest length estimates indicate that Vasuki had a longer body than Titanoboa. So Titanoboa may indeed be heavier and have larger vertebrae, but it was certainly never longer than Vasuki. Despite all this extraordinary data, for some reason I don't understand, the longest snake to have ever lived, received almost no public attention. If you know why, please tell me. Anyway, so where do you think the name of such a majestic creature comes from? At first glance, it clearly doesn't fit the naming structure of other snake species, but its name is truly very fitting. Vasuki is taken from the famous serpent Vasuki, found around Lord Shiva's neck in Hindu mythology. Indicus comes from its country of origin, India. In phylogenetic analyses, Vasuki was classified as a member of Madtsoiidae, as a sister taxon to the clade containing Gigantophis garstini. This family had specific anatomical characteristics diagnosing its members. For example, hypapophysis being present only in the anterior trunk, their vertebrae having a well-developed hemal spine, and the posterior part of the spine typically having short, laterally paired processes. Additionally, members of this family are thought to be constrictor snakes with primitive jaw structures, reflected in their vertebrae adapted for terrestrial locomotion. This suggests Vasuki was actually a terrestrial snake that preferred to stay on solid ground rather than in water. Although, I should also mention, it is believed to have been quite capable of swimming. Some even claim it loved hunting primitive whales. If you've made it this far in the video, you can leave a whale emoji in the comments to console Vasuki for not achieving fame, or you can press the subscribe button to support me. Therefore, regarding diet, Vasuki was the opposite of Titanoboa. If you haven't heard, recent research suggests Titanoboa was always a large-scale fisherman, not a mammal or reptile hunter. I know. Before you think I've lost my mind, let me explain. When Titanoboa was first described and classified as a member of Boidae, paleontologists naturally assumed it would behave like a modern anaconda. Anacondas are generalist predators that eat almost anything. Therefore, it was a logical assumption that Titanoboa, being a more advanced version of an anaconda, would hunt the largest prey in its environment. Giant crocodiles, giant turtles, early mammals, you name it. This hypothesis shaped almost every reconstruction and documentary about Titanoboa for years. But then something unexpected happened. More skull material was found, and scientists began to notice some odd details. Titanoboa's skull didn't look much like other boas. Its palate had an unusual shape. Its tooth count seemed abnormal. And most strikingly, the teeth themselves were peculiarly curved, almost resembling fishhook barbs. These morphological features began raising questions. The more researchers looked, the more they noticed Titanoboa's skull bore a striking resemblance to modern acrochorded snake species, which feed almost exclusively on fish. Think about where Titanoboa actually lived. The Cerrejón Formation represents a hot tropical environment intersected by vast river systems. The fossil record from this area is filled with lungfish and osteoglossomorphs. Titanoboa remains are consistently found alongside these aquatic species. Put all the evidence together and you get the picture of a giant snake specialized in hunting fish, not terrorizing land animals. So despite its frightening size, Titanoboa was essentially a massive river monster with a preference for seafood over terrestrial prey. Now, doesn't Titanoboa seem a bit less scary? But wait, I'm not done talking about Vasuki yet. The Madtsoiidae family to which Vasuki belonged appeared during the late Cretaceous, about 28 million years before the Boidae family evolved. And because this family was old enough, it was quite primitive in some key aspects, particularly in the structure of their jaws. Modern boa snakes have an extra quadrate bone and elastic ligaments in their jaw structure. These adaptations allow them to dislocate their jaws and open their mouths to incredible angles, enabling them to swallow prey whole, even much larger than their own heads. Madtsoiids did not have these adaptations. They lacked the extra quadrate bone and elastic tendons. Therefore, despite being powerful constrictors, they could not swallow their prey whole. Now, you might think this sounds like good news. If it can't swallow you whole, maybe you have a chance to escape, right? Wrong. Completely wrong. Because instead, Madtsoiids likely did something much more horrifying. Using their recurved blade-like teeth, similar to varanid lizards, they would tear bite-sized chunks of flesh from their prey and swallow those. So if you were caught by one of these creatures, there was no chance of escape. Actually, you wouldn't need to worry about that, because Vasuki's constriction would kill you long before feeding began. Now, let's talk a bit about that crushing power. Consider the anaconda, one of today's most feared constrictors. A large anaconda can generate a squeezing force of about 90 pounds per square inch. That's enough to crush ribs, collapse lungs, and stop your heart. Terrifying and incredibly effective. But if we scale this up, Vasuki indicus makes an anaconda look like a garden hose. Vasuki's vertebrae are 6 times wider than an anaconda's. 6 times. When you proportionally increase the constriction force, we're talking about a crushing power comparable to a crocodile's bite. And we're not talking about a small crocodile here. We're talking about forces capable of shattering bones, compressing a rib cage until it ceases to exist as a functional structure. Beyond just vertebral width, paleontologists have identified other features pointing to incredibly powerful muscles. High-riding ribs, creating a robust cylindrical body shape. Transversely wide vertebrae providing enormous attachment points for constrictor muscles. Broad neural and hemal arches, a scientific way of saying this thing had massive areas for the strongest muscles you can imagine to attach. Put all this together, and you arrive at an inevitable and horrifying conclusion. If Vasuki indicus were somehow brought back to life today, most of us would be in serious trouble. While Vasuki's colossal size was extremely frightening, it also came with a significant disadvantage. It was slow. Really, really slow. A snake 15 meters long and weighing over a ton. Now you might ask, could Vasuki indicus build muscle? Vasuki had to have an incredibly developed muscular system through evolutionary necessity. Dragging such a heavy musculoskeletal system entirely on land would be biomechanically very difficult. Therefore, it is very likely that Vasuki adopted a semi-aquatic lifestyle. Also, physics doesn't allow a 1-ton reptile to move entirely on land, because this slowness wouldn't be enough for Vasuki to sustain its struggle for life. That's why Vasuki developed a completely different strategy, one that leveraged its strengths and turned its size from a disadvantage into an advantage: ambush predation. Vasuki could wait for hours, maybe even days, completely motionless within dense vegetation. And here's something about snake camouflage. They are extraordinarily good at it, almost better than any other predator. There's even a hypothesis in evolutionary biology that humans and other primates develop particularly sharp visual acuity precisely because our ancestors needed to detect camouflaged snakes. Our eyes are literally designed to spot hidden snakes, and yet snakes still regularly manage to surprise us. So if you think you could easily spot a 1-ton snake hiding in prehistoric underbrush, I think you should reconsider. Because snakes detect you long before you see them, so you're starting at a 1 to 0 disadvantage. That's what Vasuki was like. It had extraordinary sensory abilities, excellent vision for detecting movement and shapes, and even more importantly, a highly advanced sense of smell, facilitated by its constantly flickering forked tongue. With each flick in and out, the tongue collected scent particles from the air and delivered them to the Jacobson's organ in the roof of the snake's mouth. This gave Vasuki a detailed chemical map of its surroundings. It could identify you from dozens of meters away. It could track your movement through the forest. It waited for you to be in the perfect position, and then it struck silently. This monster lived in the region of India during the Middle Eocene, about 47 million years ago. That's the beginning of the modern era, which includes us humans. India back then was a very different place from the India we know today. The world was nearly ice-free and lush with forests. Above all, it wasn't even connected to the Asian mainland yet. The Indian subcontinent was still an island, a massive landmass drifting northward on a collision course with the Asian plate. This isolation created unique evolutionary pressures and opportunities. With limited migration routes, species evolved in relative isolation, leading to the emergence of some truly bizarre and unique fauna. The climate was significantly warmer than today. With a relatively low temperature difference between the poles and the equator, it felt humidly warm. An average temperature of 28 degrees Celsius is estimated. Dense swamps and forests covered much of the landscape. These swamps created ideal conditions for reptiles and the prey species they depended on. The specific area where Vasuki fossils were discovered represents what paleontologists call a mosaic habitat. Swamps, marshes, wooded areas, and waterways intertwined to form an incredibly productive ecosystem. And this place was teeming with life. Catfish swam in murky waters. Turtles basked on muddy banks. Numerous crocodilian species competed for territory and food. But the most notable residents were whales. Yes, whales. In India, on land. Species like Andrewsiphius and Cuchicatus represent some of the earliest whales in the fossil record. These proto-marine mammals were so primitive, they weren't yet fully adapted to aquatic life. They still had functional limbs and could probably come ashore, much like modern sea lions. This made them easy prey for something like Vasuki. Think about that for a moment. Snakes hunting whales on land. It sounds like something out of a dream, but it's supported by fossil evidence. These early whales shared the same environment as Vasuki, had the body mass to make them valuable prey, and spent significant time on land where a terrestrial predator could ambush them. The region was also filled with other whale species. Gaviacetus, Indocetus, Babiacetus, and Dalanistes have all been found in formations near where Vasuki was discovered. Primitive Sirenians, the ancestors of modern manatees and dugongs, also inhabited these waters. Species like Protosiren, Eosiren, and Eothyroides. Some of these early sea cows still had functional limbs, meaning they too could come ashore and potentially fall victim to Vasuki. But Vasuki wasn't the only snake in town. Multiple python species also lived in these swamps and forests. And here's a fascinating thing. Paleontologists believe some of the python species living in Eocene India were the direct ancestors of pythons still found in India today. They've survived for tens of millions of years essentially unchanged, a testament to how effective the python body plan is. But as successful as pythons were, none came close to Vasuki's size or predatory prowess. If you thought you could escape to the ocean to get away from snakes, I have bad news for you, because there were giant snakes in the water too. The sea snake Paleophis colossius, with a powerful tail fluke and a robust body reaching up to 5.7 meters or 19 feet, patrolled the coastal waters surrounding India. Sure, that's not as big as Vasuki, but still large enough to make a swim to safety, an utterly terrifying endeavor. And here's what really puts Vasuki's extraordinariness into perspective. There was literally a giant sea snake swimming in the ocean, and that still wasn't your biggest problem. The thing you needed to worry about most was the even bigger snake waiting on land. For the wildlife of Eocene India, Vasuki remained a constant threat for millions of years. Once this apex predator evolved and became established, it stuck like glue. It became a fundamental part of the Indian ecosystem, shaping prey populations and influencing the evolution of other species. One of the main reasons Vasuki could reach such enormous sizes was a perfect combination of environmental factors. The Eocene experienced periods of intense global warming that scientists call hyperthermal events. Many species couldn't withstand these heat waves and went extinct. But snakes, being ectothermic reptiles dependent on external heat sources, actually thrived during these warm periods. The hot climate, combined with the incredibly fertile ecosystem of Eocene India, created ideal conditions for a giant predator. But as you might guess, their luck didn't last forever. As the Eocene progressed toward the Oligocene, the world entered a cooling trend. It wasn't a sudden, catastrophic change, but rather a gradual shift that had actually been underway for some time. Global carbon dioxide levels slowly decreased, temperatures dropped, and crucially for Vasuki, the climate became drier. Those lush, humid swamp forests that supported abundant prey populations began to shrink. The populations of the large animals Vasuki fed on started to decline. For a reptile of this size, which needed specific temperature ranges and enormous amounts of food, the end was clear. Here was a giant snake that absolutely needed warmth and a moist, swampy home. And now both of these critical factors were being stripped away. Time was running out. By about 33.9 million years ago, before the Eocene had even ended, Vasuki indicus disappeared from the fossil record. It couldn't adapt quickly enough to the changing conditions. When your entire survival strategy is based on being a 15-meter-long ambush predator dependent on specific environmental parameters, you don't have much flexibility as the world changes around you. The snake that had ruled India's swamps and forests for millions of years became another victim of climate change, a lost relic of deep time and a reminder that our planet is in constant flux. Although Vasuki indicus is gone forever, its family line continued. The Madtsoiidae family, though having lost its most impressive member, managed to persist in various parts of the world. They lost their dominance during the Eocene, and afterward, that's certain. But they survived. Some species continued to live in India and other regions. And surprisingly, some Madtsoiids survived until about 12,000 years ago. That's practically yesterday in geological terms. These ancient primitive snakes shared the Earth with modern humans. Our ancestors may have encountered the last survivors of this family, and many of them, not just Vasuki indicus, were formidable predators in their own right. First of all, this discovery sheds light on the incredible biodiversity of India during the Eocene. For a predator like Vasuki indicus to reach such enormous sizes, prey had to be abundant. A discovery of this magnitude rekindles interest in the ancient life of the subcontinent. It also demonstrates how incredibly well animals can adapt to their environments. There is still much we don't know about this creature. Thank you for watching. Let me know you made it this far in the video by leaving a snake emoji in the comments as a tribute to Vasuki indicus being longer than Titanoboa. You can also support me by subscribing to my channel. See you next time.